right, operations with complex numbers. This is learning target 2 that we're going to be starting. So this is just back to our basics, adding, subtracting, and multiplying, okay? So when there is a symbol in between two parentheses, you need to make sure you're distributing that, especially if it's a negative. So let's distribute this negative through. So a negative and a negative here becomes a positive 6, and a negative and a positive also will then become a negative. So that would be negative 5i. And then you just carry this down, 5 plus I. And then from here, all you have to do is combine like terms. So 5s are like terms, or constant numbers are like terms. 5 plus 6 gives us 11. And then I minus 5i. So 1 minus 5 is going to give us a negative 4i. And that is it. For number 2, okay, we're doing PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, okay? So let's just write it out without our parentheses, because if we just distribute this positive, everything's going to stay what it is. So it would be 6i minus 6, not plus, because there's a negative 3 there, so plus times a negative 3 gives us a negative 3, and then plus times a plus still gives us a plus 4i. Now just combining like terms. So let's do our constant terms first. Negative 6 minus 3 is going to give me a negative 9. And then 6i plus 4i is going to give me a plus 10i. And that will be your answer. Okay. Moving on to number 3. I don't know why this says m here. It's supposed to be 8i. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and distribute this negative through. So a negative and a negative. It's going to give me a positive 4, and a negative is, again, it's going to give me a plus 8i. Then carry down the first part. Negative 3 plus 8i. Now we're just combining like terms. So negative 3 plus 4 gives me a positive 1. And then 8i plus 8i gives me plus 16i. Okay, for number 4, all we're doing is adding, combining like terms. Okay, I don't have to do anything because there's a plus sign in the middle. So 5 plus 8 is going to give me 13. And negative 8i plus 7i is going to give me a negative 1i. You can just write it as negative I. All right, number 5, we have parentheses coming back to back to each other. When there's no sign in the middle, that means we need to multiply. So it would be negative 3 times 7 to give us a negative 21. Negative 3 times 6i to give us a negative 18i. 7i times 7 gives us a positive 49i. Then 7i times 6i. So 7 times 6 gives me 42. And then I times I will give me I squared. The biggest thing you need to remember here when dealing with imaginary numbers, which is what this I means, I squared equals negative 1. So every time you see an I squared, you need to replace it with a negative 1. Okay? So very important right there. So because I have an I squared here, I'm going to change that to negative 1. So I would do 42 times negative 1 to give me a negative 42. And just go ahead and carry everything else down. So negative 21 minus 18i plus 49i. Now we're just combining like terms. So negative 21 minus 42 is going to give me a negative 63. And then negative 18 plus 49i is going to give me a positive 31i. That would be our final answer. All right, here we go with multiplying again. Let's do these two parentheses first. Okay, so multiplying these two here. -4 times -5 gives me 20. I times I gives me I squared. Now remember, this important rule, I squared is always -1, so we're going to go ahead and change it to be -1. So 20 times a -1 gives me a -20. I'm going to go ahead and carry down this parentheses now and put it right after the -20. 2 plus 7i. And now I'm just going to distribute. So -20 times 2 to give me a -40. And -20 times 7i to give me a -140i. That would be your final answer. All right, let me get some space here. Here we go again. Two parentheses back to back, no sign in the middle, means we're going to multiply. So -1 times a -5 gives us a +5. -1 times 6i gives us a -6i. And then I times -5 to give me a -5i. And I times 6i. So I times I is going to give me I squared. And 6 times 1 gives me 6. Remember, changing our I squared to that -1 right away. 6 times -1 just gives me -6. And we'll go ahead and carry everything else down. 5 minus 6i minus 5i minus 6. Combining like terms, so 5 and -6, which is going to give me -1. And then -6i and -5i to give me -11i with our final answer there. All right, moving on to 8. Let's go ahead and multiply these two in front. So 2 times 8i gives me 16i. Carry down that parentheses. And then I'm going to distribute that 16i through. 16i times 3 to give me a 48i. And 16i times a -2i to give me a -32i squared. Again, I need to change my I squared right away to -1. So -32 times -1 will give me a +32. So it would be 48i plus 32. All right, number 10 actually looks like, or let's do 9 first, sorry. We'll discard these two right now. Number 9 on your paper should look like k squared equals -15. Okay, so we need to get rid of the squared and solve for k. So we're going to solve by taking the square root of both sides. You're never allowed to have a negative inside a square root, so whenever you see that negative, remember you have to pull that negative out to make it I, because that negative inside of a square root gives us an imaginary number. Square root of k squared is k, and then I cannot simplify the square root of 15, so your answer would just be plus or minus. Don't forget your plus or minus. K equals plus or minus I square root of 15. All right, number 10 here. On your paper, it should say r squared plus 5 equals 1. So we need to get our r squared by ourselves. So we need to subtract this 5 from both sides. What you do to one side, you always have to do to the other. 5 minus 5 cancels out. I get r squared equals 1 minus 5 to give me -4. Now I'm getting rid of the squared, so I'm going to square root both sides. Square root of r squared is just r. Remember, negative here, pulling it out to make it an I. Whenever we square root something, it's always plus or minus. And square root of 4 is 2. So let's rewrite it this way. So it's square root of 4, which is 2i. So plus or minus 2i would be your answer. If you have any questions, make sure you jump on the Google Meet. Otherwise, have a great day.